Termed as the Sepoy Mutiny by the British, the Revolt of 1857, or the First War of Independence, was brought about by the introduction of cartridges greased by cow and pig fat, discontenting both the Hindus and Muslims. The revolt did not have mass participation, but it was the beginning towards the end of British rule. In India, many political organizations were formed before INC, but all of them had limited and localized participation. Soon, a need for an all-India organization was felt, and hence the Indian National Congress was formed in 1885. In 1905, Bengal was divided. The reason given for its partition was that Bengal was a large province and hence was being divided for better administration. However, the actual reason of the division was to slow down the nationalism that was uprising in Bengal. The twin movement was a combination of Swadeshi and boycott movements, which were aimed at promoting patriotism by boycotting British goods, persuading shopkeepers not to sell foreign goods, boycotting British schools and colleges, and promoting indigenous industries. Muslim leaders were encouraged by the British to form separate organizations as they wanted to stop the Hindu-Muslim unity. Influenced by these suggestions, in 1906, Aga Khan and Nawab Salimullah met Lord Minto and asked him for the permission to start the All India Muslim League to promote the interests of the Muslim community. In 1907, at the Surat session, Congress split formally into the moderates and extremists as they both had different views on many issues. The extremists wanted independence from the British, whereas the moderates only wanted more Indian participation in the legislature. In 1909, an act known as the Morley-Minto Reforms was passed. The main initiative of this act was to divide and rule the Indians by a system of separate electorates for the Hindus and Muslims. The First World War began in 1914, and the British used Indian resources and soldiers to fight the war. The Indian leaders thought that extending support to the British during the war would later help them to fulfill their demands. But, unfortunately, nothing such happened. With the return of Gandhi to India in 1915, a new phase in the national movement began. Gandhiji developed a method of mass agitation called Satyagraha, which was based on the principle of non-violence and tolerance. With his Satyagraha, Gandhiji soon became a leader with large followers. The Home Rule movement began in India and was led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak with the objective of achieving self-government. The movement was soon spread all over India. In 1916, at the Lucknow session of Congress, the Muslim League and the Congress united and decided to fight for Swaraj together. The moderates and the extremists also united, and this came to be known as the Lucknow Pact. A peaceful public meeting at Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, was held on 13th April 1919, which was fired over by the British soldiers under the command of General Dyer, who had also ordered his soldiers to close the only exit of the park so that no one could escape. In 1920, the Ali brothers launched the Khilafat movement, which was an agitation by the Indian Muslims allied with the Indian nationalists to pressurize the British government to preserve the authority of the Ottoman Sultan as the Caliph of Islam after World War I. The non-cooperation movement started in India in 1920 with the aim to redress the wrongs done to Punjab and Turkey and to attain Swaraj by all legitimate and peaceful means. Methods of the movement were strikes, hartals, boycott of foreign goods and educational institutions, and emergence of indigenous industries. 5th February 1922, the police station at Chauri Chaura fired at a group of demonstrators. The demonstrators retaliated by burning down the police station, causing death of 22 English policemen. In the wake of this violence, Gandhiji called off the non-cooperation movement. The Swaraj Party was established in January 1923 that sought self-government and political freedom for the Indian people from the British rule. The main leaders were Motilal Nehru and C.R. Das, among many others. The Simon Commission was led by Sir John Simon, who came to India to study the working of the Government of India Act 1919. The commission didn't have a single Indian member and hence met with nationwide strike and was greeted by the banners saying, "Go back, Simon." After no response to his letter from Lord Irwin, Gandhiji as promised started his famous salt satyagraha on 12 March 1930. He started from Sabarmati Ashram and walked 240 miles to Dandi. At the coastal town of Dandi, Gandhiji and his followers disregarded the salt law by making salt from seawater. In 1931, a political agreement was signed between Mahatma Gandhi and Lord Irwin. The Gandhi-Irwin Pact spelled out certain specific action points to be initiated by the colonial government as well as the Indian National Congress. The Pune Pact refers to an agreement between Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi signed on 24 September 1932, where it was agreed to give adequate representations to the depressed classes in non-Muslim electorate and civil services. Depressed classes agreed to adhere to the principle of joint electorate. The two-nation theory was the founding principle of the Pakistan movement and the partition of India in 1947. The ideology that religion is the main factor in defining the nationality was used by Muhammad Ali Jinnah while he demanded for a separate Muslim state. In March 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps came to India to seek support of the Indian leaders in the Second World War, in exchange offering India Dominion status. The proposal was rejected by both Congress and Muslim League. Thus, Cripps' mission was a failure. Gandhiji called it a post-dated check on a failing bank. The Quit India movement was the last major mass movement in the history of Indian freedom struggle. The All India Congress Committee passed the Quit India resolution on 8 August 1942 under guidance of Gandhiji. The resolution demanded for immediate end of British rule. The provisions of the Mountbatten Plan were introduced in the British Parliament, which was passed as the Indian Independence Act in 1947. The details of power transfer among the new governments of India and Pakistan were pronounced in this act. The destination was reached. India attained its independence on 15th of August 1947, but immediately began one of the greatest migrations in history, in which millions of people couldn't make it. Communities that had coexisted in harmony attacked each other, and childhood friends had become sworn enemies. One of the deadliest bloodsheds took place, and out of this bloodshed were born two nations, India and Pakistan.